Hi, welcome to the bathtub. When you see this iconic puppy saying, I want to get up and be in the movie, and it's time to get on here. Okay, and then if you want to get off, you can, because we're not going to pick you up. And then you hear this iconic music, eventually. Then you know it's time for, not only is it a bathtub, it's time for one of our special theme shows here in the bathtub, which is Pointless Adventures in Literature. That's what Lucky sees the FedEx man coming out. This is Lucky's expression when she sees the FedEx man coming up outside. The demon from hell is who it is. The important things to remember are is sometimes these stories are pointless. Sometimes they're meaningless. Sometimes they're both pointless and meaningless, but they're always pointless, meaningless, or both. And that's what we can bank on that here at the bathtub. We don't promise you much, but we deliver on that. And today, you're even getting the angelic glow. You're getting the Raphael me, this almost beatific angel coming off the YouTube. It's because the lighting, natural lighting, and then overhead lighting, they counteract. They conflict with one another in a way that benefits me. Anyway, and not much does. Today we're talking about. I guess Lucky's going to stay here. Do you want to stay up here, my darling? Okay, just don't attack me in front. I don't want people to see you when you go crazy. We're going to talk today about the Dangerous Vision books by Harlan Ellison. I think I'm going to do 2 episodes of this because it may be going for a long time, but I'll try to cover it in one. If we do it in 2 parts, it'll be okay. Do you want to get down, Lucky? Do you want to get down? She sees it. There she sees him. The FedEx man. Oh, no. Come on, Lucky. Come on, get down. Come on. Off. Good dog. Good dog. Get down. Come here. We're having a little bit of a trauma here. And do we have a treat for you? So anyway, we're talking about Last Dangerous Visions and blah, blah, blah. I don't have any treats for you. You're going to have to live without them. I'm so sorry. When we were coming back from China, don't forget, this is, you know me as the master bather, but in China, where we just came back from China, I'm known as Pao Zhao Jiao Shou. That's how they refer to me when I go into restaurants. They refer to me as that. It's an estimable, I'm a highly esteemed figure in China, and this is the actual term in Chinese. My wife and my sister-in-law figured this out, and that is foamy bathtub professor. I'm a professor of foamy bathtubs. Very, very highly regarded position in China and in most Asian countries. Good dog, Luck. You're doing very well. So on the way back, I was looking at my Kindle. I had my Kindle. I was constantly losing it and picking it up because I didn't want to carry books all over. And somewhere along the line, when I could actually get onto the internet, because in China, getting on the interweb in China is not easy. I saw that they had published that Last Dangerous Visions. It was kind of a weird experience because for people of my generation, the Last Dangerous Visions was it was pie in the sky. It never came along. For 50, 60 years, it was supposed to be published, and it never came along. And it was finally published. It was published with Harlan Ellison's name on it. And I'm going to talk more about that in the second half of this 2-part Pointless Adventure. But when I was a kid, when I was about 14, I read science fiction. 14 to 15, I read science fiction all the time. I loved science fiction. And I started off like lots of people reading Ray Bradbury and Walter Miller and Robert Sheckley. I think those were the 3. And then the Tolkien books. And I read all that stuff. And at the same time, when I was going to the basically I bought all my literature at the drugstore. And I'll get the paperback revolving racks, all the mass market paperbacks that I still love. And one of the many books I bought was Harlan Ellison's Dangerous Visions series, which originally came out in 3 paperbacks from Berkeley Books, and it was publicized as this big. First of all, it had cool covers by the Dylans. The Dylans always do these beautiful covers. I don't have those copies with me here. But here's a later edition, not too many, not in the 70s probably, the single volume paperback of Dangerous Visions. And Harlan Ellison was a force of nature. A lot of people have talked about him. He was quite a significant character in science fiction and in contemporary literature, and had a very powerful presence. We've talked a little bit about him in the past because one of the times I met him when I was young was when he came to Avram Davidson's class. He and Avram were good old friends and been friends for decades, and clearly loved each other. And Ellison was a temperamental, interesting, difficult figure, I guess, in literature. And he, in the 60s, commissioned well, he didn't commission. He opened up this idea, which is he wanted science fiction writers to really not just write for the market, because the market of science fiction was quite lively. I still think 50s and 60s SF is probably the best stuff that has ever been published. But at the same time, they were limited, and there were certain things they couldn't touch, like sexuality or anything that was anything that was promoted communism. I think Mac Reynolds was the only communist science fiction writer, and that they were restricted in lots of ways. And they had a lot of stylistic energy, a lot of stylistic passion and originality, and storytelling, kind of just brilliance. There were so many brilliant short story writers back then. So Ellison commissioned this book, and when I read it, I was reading kind of sort of literary SF. I was reading the Orbit books by Damon Knight, and even the SF magazines that I read, like Fantasy and Science Fiction, were pretty literary SF magazines. Even the Galaxies and the Galaxy magazine was pretty interesting when I read that. But when this came out, it really was exciting to read, and there was a number of reasons why it was exciting. One, the stories were fun. I mean, there was a lot of really interesting stories in here. They were very, very stylistically adventurous. They packed a lot of, like good short story writers, science fiction writers, and the writers in this book could pack a lot of energy into a single short story. They didn't drag it out for these quadrilogies, these 14-volume quadrilogies or 18-volume quadrilogies that go on forever and ever and ever. They did it all in 10 pages, and then they got the hell out of there. I still remember a lot of these stories very vividly. I'm just going over the back of it. Norman Spinrad's The Carcinoma Angels is one of my all-time favorite stories. The closing story, I and Gomorrah by Samuel R. Delany, I don't know if I totally understood it, but it was just filled with energy and with a kind of literary energy that you didn't really, made you realize this new writer had come along. Ellison did two things with these books. I want to say a couple other things about Ellison. When I was young, I thought he was a really good writer, an interesting writer, and my opinions of his stories and stuff, I lost interest in a lot of his work, his fiction, and I reread it with less pleasure than I did when I read it originally. Some of his stories I thought were really great. Some of his short stories were really just kind of brilliant, and he wrote many, many really good short stories. But many of the stories he was best known for, I'd have trouble reading now. But what he was great at, and I will say this from having met him, and I've talked about this in the past, is he loved books. I met him several times, actually. Now, my roommate at the time, Art Cover, knew Ellison really well, and I tagged along to see him. And I was at a Clarion workshop when he came for a week, and it was a song. He just never stopped entertaining people. He never stopped going. He was always on stage, as everyone said. And he was always energetic and kind of fun to be with. But he loved books, and he knew so many writers. And even reading, I started rereading the first Dangerous Visions books in order to talk about the recent volume. And it's still, these stories are still really lively and they're up to date. I mean, all these great stories in here. He used so you got lots of new young writers like Samuel R. Delany, who was sort of starting off, and writers who were just starting to come onto the stage, such as R.A. Lafferty, John T. Slottick, one of the greats. He brought Slottick's story off one of the great writers of the time, over the past century. He bought that off the slush pile, and Ellison knew the guy was good. He had a really good eye for writers. He knew my stuff was crap. I remember the classes. He basically said my stuff was crap. He was right at the time. And he read all sorts of people. So he gets young writers, and then he gets a lot of writers who'd been around a long time. Robert Silverberg, who'd been about his generation, had written lots of kind of commercial work, but was writing some of his best short stories at this time. Frederick Pohl, we've talked about Pohl and Kornbluth and Pohl's own work. Philip A. Farmer, Robert Bloch, who was best known for the what do you call it, the Psycho. He wrote Psycho, but lots and lots of horror stories, which I never read as I was younger, but I've started reading him here and there now, and he's actually pretty good and pretty disturbing. Damon Knight, Carol Emshwiller. I just read Carol Emshwiller, reread, maybe the third time, Sex and Mrs. Morrison, which is about an older woman who lives downstairs from a huge, huge man, or she doesn't know if it's a man or a woman really, who lives upstairs, and she becomes obsessed and falls in love with him and watches him, and it's really about the inadequacy of referring to people as either he or she. That's the whole story is about. It's well ahead of its time in its way. It's a really powerful, beautifully written story. Anyway, I've sort of done what I was going to do later in this talk, which is to enthuse about the stories that were in the first Dangerous Visions. I remember reading them as a kid. I didn't understand a lot of them. Philip was a farmer, we all know, as kind of a Burroughs, Edgar Rice Burroughs type adventure writer. He wrote a story here that Harlan wrote this big introduction for, saying it was this really terrific story called The Riders of the Purple Wage. I've never been able to finish. I can't get through that story. I can't finish it. I tried it again this time because Harlan's introduction makes you feel like an idiot if you don't read it, but I couldn't get through it. There's so many other great stories in here. Fritz Leiber's Gonna Roll the Bones is in here. I mean, Ellison was a really, really smart reader and a loving reader. He loved all these writers he wrote about so well. Philip K. Dick, who I have ups and downs about, probably the best story I've ever read by Philip K. Dick, and his stories are better than the novels, is called Faith of Our Fathers in here, which is a really, really stunning, disturbing story about a future where the communist bloc countries, including China, have taken over the world and have installed their little dictators everywhere. Anyway, all I can say is all these wonderful writers are in here. Even minor stories like Howard Rodman's The Man Who Went to the Moon Twice. I reread that, and it's still kind of a minor story, but Rodman was a very interesting TV writer, and Ellison was smart to kind of open it up. He didn't just do people who had been all over the science fiction magazines, but he brought in people like Howard Rodman and tried to bring others. Ballard's in here. I don't think there's stories in here I don't quite get. I never quite liked David Bunch that much, but he's got a real style and a kind of flair about him that almost every sentence is fun. So anyway, I had a great time. So far, I'm rereading through this. I haven't gotten to it. There's a couple stories in here I still haven't gotten to, which I really loved. But anyway, this has got some great stories in it. It still holds up, and it doesn't feel dated. Anyway, this is the new series. So what happened is this publisher called Blackwell or Blackstone. You know we work hard here at the bathtub preparing these talks. Blackstone Publishers, they've reissued Dangerous Vision in a nice, beautiful hardcover book. I just prefer the mass market paperbacks if you can get the old ones. But it has actually yet another. There's so many introductions to these books. And this one has a new one by Patton Oswalt, who's a comedian, who's actually part of a funny guy, who was actually in a little short movie I wrote. Anyway, I didn't make it, I wrote it. And it's called Ritz Crackers in the Kitchen Nook on the Edge of Forever. There's now I think there's a new introduction by the man who edited and who shepherded the last Dangerous Visions into existence. His name is J. Michael Straczynski. And then it has all the other introductions, including Isaac Asimov's introductions. Anyway, there's more introductions than you can get through sometimes. But the actual book with the beautiful old Leo and Diane Dillon, they look like almost woodcuts from the old illustrations. From the original book. There they are. There's the Faith of Our Fathers. Really an extraordinarily different, unusual, beautiful book. Anyway, that's been brought back out by Blackstone. And if you wanted to get this with all the new updated stuff, and Patton Oswalt, it's kind of very short but very loving introduction about his friendship with Harlan. And even those of us who didn't know him that well refer to him as Harlan. There's a Michael Moorcock introduction here. There's a lot of introductions. Anyway, that's just come out from Blackstone. And then I haven't talked as much about it, so I'm going to have to quit this fairly quickly. But then about 4 or 5 years after Dangerous Visions, I was in high school when again Dangerous Visions came out. And here's it came out as a 2-volume paperback edition. And we didn't really talk so much about it, but not only was Harlan Ellison really a good eye for really just talented, fun, exciting, different fiction, and really he loved the stuff he was publishing, and he knew the good writers, but he has this enthusiasm in his introductions, which, as anyone who's read these books knows, the introductions to the individual writers is like the most fun, is some of the most fun stuff in the books. I mean, he writes introductions for example, to Poul Anderson, who I like some of Poul Anderson's works, but only Harlan would know everything by all these other writers, and then still know all of Poul Anderson's novels. including some of the really good ones that I like, such as, was it 3 Hearts and 3 Lions? But all the science fiction book stories. And he writes this 2-page, 3-page, really fun introductions to all the writers. He often gives them a chance to write their own introductions to their own lives, or summarize their lives. And then they all write afterward to the story that they wrote, which is my least favorite part of it, but there's some of the laughter are sort of fun. Anyway, again, Dangerous Visions, the writers that were in these, Brian Aldiss is, first of all, Brian Aldiss has a 10-page story in this that's just great. It's more fun than almost any science fiction magazine I've read in the past 20 years. Just one short story. Even that's one of the minor stories in the book. And then, again, Dangerous Visions has all our favorites. Thomas Dish, Kate Wilhelm is in here. David Gerald, one of the first stories I read of David Gerald's really a fun, lively story. Shows that he knew what he was doing. Ross Rocklin. This is the other part of Ellison. It was so fascinating. He grew up reading the science fiction and all the old pulp magazines. And Ross Rocklin was a big staple, a mainstay of the analog magazine. And that was called Astounding at the time. Anyway, he gets Ross Rocklin to write a story here. It's called Chingwich. I don't think it won an award, but it should have. It just got so much life in it. It's just so adventurous and so stylistically fun. And it's like Ross Rocklin is still thinking and writing new stories late in his 50s, late 50s, early 60s, which is not that old to old farts like me. The Again Dangerous Visions has Ed Emshwiller, Carol Emshwiller's husband, who did this really cool series of illustrations for each of the stories, which they go up as almost like a timeline. As I recall, Ellison had all of them framed in his house that he called Ellison Wonderland. Anyway, here's the volume. Here's the picture of the funeral. Kate Wilhelm's the funeral. You see they all they string off so that they can be lined up on these it's like diorama. Kate Wilhelm, one of the great writers. Again, Ellison always knew who the good writers were. Again, Dangerous Visions, that's also out from Blackstone Books. And has that got a new introduction in it? God, they got so many different introductions to it. Oh, yeah, so I didn't read that. David A. Goodman. Oh, that's interesting. I'll probably go back and see what this new introduction says in there. Anyway, I didn't read that part. Anyway, the illustrations, the introductions, Ellison's love for the books and the stories themselves almost all still hold up. They're really a lot of fun. And I don't know if I'll read them all the way through, but I've been bringing a couple into the bathtub every day and enjoying going back to these old books. Okay, I'm going to stop this now. It's gone too long because I want to talk a little bit about The Last Dangerous Visions and the kind of a mighty publishing effort that's been put through by this guy Straczynski. We'll talk a little bit about it. Okay, bye.